At 3:47 in Texas, a border agent lies deceased. A spy chief is unmasked. And a diplomat abuses his privileges. 40 clandestine deliveries and millions washed through offshore accounts mark the most severe violation of American independence in recent times, revealing criminality within the state itself. On that precise date, I also authorized a mandate establishing a Homeland Security Commission to unite federal, state, and regional allies. The objective is to fulfill the national strategy of eradicating the syndicate's existence in America permanently. Everything originated in Texas with a standard examination. Evan Marshall was 31, a junior federal border inspector who was fit, energetic, and free of medical issues. During a night rotation, he detected an anomaly with a parcel from the Mexican consulate. The documentation appeared correct, yet the mass was significantly too high. Evan called for a supplementary verification. Within moments, 2 high-ranking managers appeared, both looking visibly anxious. They asked no queries but issued a command to back off, stating the cargo was shielded by diplomatic protocols. Evan complied, yet he did not dismiss the incident. Prior to concluding his watch, he submitted an internal log, believing the establishment would manage the issue. 3 weeks afterward, Evan Marshall was discovered lifeless in his residence. The formal reason was sudden heart failure, with no post-mortem required and no inquiry launched. A robust young male was lost, and the document he quietly drafted vanished into thin air. If you think Evan Marshall did not perish from natural causes, write investigate in the comments. The file Evan submitted did not vanish entirely, as it landed with Special Agent Mark Ellison, a seasoned FBI researcher skilled at spotting overlooked trends. What worried him was not the cargo itself but the identity connected to it: Jonathan P. Reeves, the former head of the CIA. Ellison applied for monitoring immediately. What followed was unsettling, involving strange callers, massive fund transfers, reinforced doors, and armed private security rotating in shifts. FBI leadership acted fast. A federal magistrate signed off on a surprise entry order. At sunrise, units encircled Reeves's Texas home. As they neared the entrance, rapid gunfire broke out because Reeves had employed soldiers of fortune who were drilled, equipped, and prepared to slay. A peaceful district transformed into a combat zone. Stun grenades detonated while protective barriers absorbed the initial impacts. Operatives pushed forward with disciplined shooting. The skirmish continued for almost 10 minutes. Inside, Reeves was apprehended incinerating files. The inspection that ensued was more severe than the shootout. Under the floorboards lay 20 kilograms of fentanyl and heroin. In the cellar were military-grade firearms with their identification codes filed away. Inside a metal vault sat $18 million in currency and bullion. Jonathan P. Reeves was shackled and escorted away. The astonishment within the Bureau was instantaneous. If a past intelligence chief had violated this boundary, what precisely had Evan Marshall revealed? A former spy boss involved with narcotics, armaments, and money. If you hold that no past administrator should be beyond the statute, like this clip and reply yes, the detention of Jonathan P. Reeves ought to have concluded the narrative. Instead, it unveiled a grimier reality. As FBI squads analyzed his electronics, a design appeared that was structured, intentional, and much older than anyone anticipated. Reeves had not recently stumbled into vice. He had constructed a criminal kingdom while still employed within the intelligence sector, utilizing his skills not to protect the country but to conceal his actions from it. Monetary paths connected him explicitly to the CJNG syndicate in Texas, exposing an alliance spanning years. He supplied the tactics, they supplied the workforce, and jointly they grew into sectors far more savage than drugs. Human smuggling, organ extraction, and illicit arms deliveries traversed state and global borders. Yet the most alarming find originated from messages mined from locked directories. Reeves possessed an ally with diplomatic sanctuary, Ambassador Alejandro Cruz Vega of Mexico. More than 40 official deliveries had crossed into the United States under Vega's jurisdiction. Each was marked as heritage goods, yet each weighed nearly 900 kilograms, far exceeding any valid freight. Funds were washed through overseas ledgers in Panama, Cyprus, and the British Virgin Islands. A phantom firm called Meridian Global Logistics served as the quiet center. Possessing no staff and no brick-and-mortar location, it was merely a flow of untrackable transactions. Reeves had also positioned faithful allies throughout regional bureaus. A parish lawman, a DIA specialist, and various office clerks quietly approved documentation. This was not a syndicate branch. It was a guarded web. It extended from Texas harbors to international consulates. The FBI now grasped they were not confronting outlaws concealing themselves from the structure. They were battling villains hiding within it. Diplomatic exemption was utilized as a guard for felony. If you think exemption should never shelter lawbreakers, reply and immunity. Detectives soon understood the actual core was not Reeves. It was Ambassador Alejandro Cruz Vega. He was guarded by a foreign banner and misusing privileges to transport 40 gigantic official loads offshore. The Bureau knew the reality but could not apprehend him. Statecraft had turned into a buffer for villains. A choice had to be reached at the supreme level. In a secret gathering, federal bureaus displayed their discoveries. The proof was undeniable. The peril was imminent. For the initial time in recent American chronicles, the administration consented to perform the unimaginable. They revoked diplomatic exemption prior to a mission. The time moved rapidly following that. At 3:47 amidst the shroud of night, FBI assault units and a Marine Quick Reaction Force positioned themselves around the Mexican official compound. Marines established the exterior perimeter, mute and rigorous, sealing every way out. Federal agents moved toward the primary gate with entry tools, night sights, and approved warrants. Unmatched in magnitude, the raid commenced with a thundering snap. An explosive charge ripped apart the fortified entry, blowing grit across the plaza. Marines advanced with exactness, holding the line as FBI squads rushed the embassy interior. Shots rang out immediately within the walls. Private mercenaries employed by Vega, heavily equipped and drilled for war, initiated fire from high ground. Projectiles bounced off stone surfaces. Stun grenades erupted like blinding electricity. Agents pushed forward in close order, their armor stopping the initial volleys as they drove deeper down tight hallways. The clash spanned minutes but seemed to last longer. Chamber by chamber, level by level, operatives secured the facility. They discovered blocked entries, smashed data drives, and hurriedly deserted desks. On the lower level, a toughened iron gate protected the cellar. A secondary blast blew it open. What lurked beneath was more terrible than any shootout. Lines of clinical freezers sat there, organs packed for shipment. Stainless metal benches were covered with toxic residue. Pressing gear, dust blocks, and skids wrapped for transport were visible. There was sufficient fentanyl, amphetamine, and heroin to inundate several regions for months. In a secret room at the rear, $67 million in stacked bills was concealed behind a fake partition. On the third level, Ambassador Vega was located trying to flee via a maintenance passage. He was shackled instantly. No banner, no pact, and no protection remained to guard him. At that identical hour, synchronized strikes hit syndicate hideouts, storage lots, and money fronts throughout Texas. The web crumbled on various flanks in a solitary night. For the inaugural time, statecraft had succumbed to legal repercussions. The conflict that had stayed unseen finally became observable to the country. When the last rounds ceased and the embassy grounds fell quiet, the inquiry moved into a fresh and far more exposing stage. The combat had concluded, but the reality was only starting to emerge. What operatives found within that structure and throughout the connected sites raided that same evening revealed a method of illicit activities so deep, so thoroughly guarded, that many within the Bureau struggled to believe how long it had stayed concealed. The cellar of the consulate became the initial center of attention. Rows of freezers, each labeled with medical transit tags, were listed and unsealed under rigorous scientific rules. Inside were human body parts. Kidneys, livers, and eyes were kept for fast delivery. Paperwork retrieved from a nearby table tracked the arrival point of every load. Illicit hospitals in South America, private purchasers in Europe, and clandestine webs working far from supervision were the recipients. It was structured, lucrative, and startlingly standard. Next appeared the drugs. Commercial-grade stamping units, airflow systems masked as repair gear, and chemical barrels loaded with raw ingredients were present. The volumes captured, fentanyl, meth, heroin, were sufficient to feed syndicate supply lines for months. Agents understood they were not observing a fleeting project. This was a fully operational manufacturing hub. It was constructed in the single location no federal bureau was permitted to examine. However, the finds reached far beyond the compound borders. Concurrent strikes throughout Texas exposed the exterior levels of the framework Reeves and Ambassador Vega had established. In a rural warehousing site, operatives located transport logs matching diplomatic cargoes. Each was meticulously ciphered to hide the actual contents. In a residential storage unit, they found folders packed with work files of people smuggled across the boundary. Many of them had disappeared shortly after getting there. Their identities were connected to infirmaries, ranches, plants, and private lands. These were locations that had silently used up defenseless human lives without drawing notice. Digital proof was even more alarming. Hundreds of locked texts retrieved from confiscated computers described a global commerce web with arms extending into Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Some texts mentioned products while others noted fresh stock. This was language that robbed sufferers of their humanity and transformed them into goods. The magnitude was mechanical. The mood was emotionless. The scheme had been permitted to function because the main portal, Vega's consulate, was shielded by diplomatic statute. Financial auditing revealed the blueprint that kept this engine turning. Funds cycled through strata of foreign entities in Panama, Cyprus, and the British Virgin Islands before re-emerging in the United States as property fees, consulting bills, and safety agreements. At the core resided Meridian Global Logistics, a corporation with no payroll, no depot, and no workers. It lived only to channel millions of dollars between illicit associates who thought they were beyond reach. What startled detectives most was not the intricacy but the directness. The web flourished because everyone assumed diplomatic immunity was unbreakable. With Vega detained and Reeves already incarcerated, the framework was falling apart. Yet the injury it had caused to populations, to kin, and to faith in the establishment was only starting to be comprehended. This was not merely illegality. It was penetration. It was decay. And the repercussions were nowhere near finished. As the facts continued to surface, the FBI grasped that the criminal web was not merely a complex mission. It was a lesion that had been hemorrhaging into American towns for years. What agents found reached far beyond narcotics, cash, or tainted bureaucrats. It revealed a quiet deterioration of security that households throughout Texas had sensed long before anyone realized why. The initial warnings showed up in coroner files. Instances marked as natural deaths abruptly assumed new significance when paired with Reeves's coded messages. Young laborers, recent arrivals, and poor citizens had perished without reason. Fatalities were waved away as cardiac arrest, lack of fluids, or occupational mishaps, yet their identities appeared constantly in confiscated files connected to smuggling routes and organ inventories. They were not accidental deaths. They were victims of a concealed market that viewed human existence as stock. Towns near the boundary had long reported increasing vanishings, specifically among defenseless demographics. Fathers and mothers spoke of kids who traversed the line looking for chances and never contacted home again. Shelters noted absent lodgers who had departed with employment scouts guaranteeing fast money. For years, these accounts were managed individually. Local police filed lost person reports. Nonprofits assumed human smuggling. Health agencies noted mysterious deaths. Only now, with the proof charted, did the FBI visualize the complete image. The network preyed on the most unprotected members of the community. In residential districts, the fallout took a distinct shape. Artificial narcotics manufactured inside Vega's consulate had inundated villages that had no syndicate footprint before. Medical intakes for fentanyl poisonings had risen silently. Rehab clinics saw younger clients. School safety officers reported drugs far more powerful than anything previously known. What appeared to be a widespread national narcotic wave was actually the outcome of a distribution line built from within diplomatic barriers. Even police organizations had been compromised. In questionings held after the strikes, numerous officers confessed they had ceased submitting odd incident reports because nothing ever occurred afterward. Others admitted that they relied on Reeves's standing, thinking a past CIA chief could not possibly be mixed up in crimes. This misguided reliance permitted entire districts to be exploited. It allowed checks to be skipped. It allowed victims to be transferred without anyone linking the clues. Beyond the physical damage, the psychological cost was deep. Civic figures spoke of neighborhoods existing with a feeling of anxiety. Families bolted entrances earlier. Guardians warned adolescents against taking evening rotations. Locals were scared to report weird actions near storage lots or country estates. What they dreaded wasn't simply crime. It was the mounting suspicion that the apparatus designed to shield them had malfunctioned. Religious groups, newcomer associations, and regional charities moved into the void, providing whatever help they could. Yet they too sensed the burden of treachery. Many had relied on embassy-funded initiatives and social exchanges, unaware that some were being utilized as facades to conceal illegal transfers. The most agonizing realization arrived when agents examined the chronology. This web had been functioning for nearly 10 years. For years, towns had endured unexplained calamities, unaware they were manifestations of a grander concealed engine run by influential men shielded by ranks, jobs, and global statutes. The FBI now confronted the reality. Restoring security would demand more than captures. It would necessitate reconstructing faith. One household, one district, and one rattled town at a time. And the further they investigated, the more they grasped that the genuine casualties of this web were not only those who disappeared. They were whole populations that never realized they were under siege, with the detentions complete and the citizenry finally cognizant of the corruption's magnitude. The FBI's attention turned to a much harder inquiry. How had this web endured for such a duration? It was insufficient to confiscate narcotics, close safe houses, or put a past CIA boss and a foreign envoy in shackles. The deeper problem was foundational. Something inside the apparatus had fractured, and nobody had observed until corpses, money pads, and diplomatic boxes narrated the tale. Internal assessments started at once. Federal bureaus initiated concurrent audits, sifting through years of files, leads, and ground grievances. What they located was not a shortage of data but a shortage of linkage. Fragments of the reality had been logged scores of times. Solitary events in boundary towns, mysterious deaths in parish clinics, deliveries with inconsistent masses, and nameless leads regarding warehouses running at night. Each bureau viewed pieces. None viewed the entire design. That malfunction had permitted Reeves and Vega to function loosely. It had permitted syndicate funds to penetrate county bureaus. It had permitted human beings to vanish without panic. Top administrators faced the stark fact. The system had not been tricked. It had been outrun. Villains had adjusted quicker than agencies designed to halt them. Legislative panels required explanations. State leaders asked for updates. Civic figures asked why every warning signal had been ignored. Yet responsibility was complex. Some errors were due to carelessness. Others were due to reliance. Reliance put in the wrong individuals. Reeves's former rank had given him a buffer of reliability that hid his offenses for years. Managers ignored whistleblowers because they knew him. Regional deputies disregarded warnings because the capital must have signed off on it. A tradition of deference had become a tool in the wrong hands. The FBI admitted another uneasy fact. Evan Marshall should never have perished. His dossier should not have been suppressed. His queries should not have been penalized. His life should not have been the cost for revealing a felony embedded in diplomacy. In the aftermath of the strikes, the Bureau started redrafting rules for cross-agency collaboration. A new method was suggested to spot irregularities across customs, intelligence, and diplomatic avenues. No solitary report could be quietly ignored again. Civic reporting channels were broadened. Medical examiners were issued new protocols for spotting deaths connected to smuggling and chemical substances. For the initial time, diplomatic loads would undergo weight-tracking reviews even when the contents stayed shielded. But rebuilding confidence would take more than fresh regulations. Town meetings throughout Texas packed with families asking for comfort. Clergy, educators, and small shopkeepers spoke of dread. Not dread of cartels, but dread that institutions had been too sightless, too sluggish, or too ready to look away. Some asked if comparable webs existed elsewhere. Others wondered how many years it would take for their towns to recover from damage they never saw approaching. Through it all, detectives kept their attention on the names still unresolved. Files marked pending, bank ledgers still live, and partners who had bolted before the strikes. The operation had crumbled, but leftovers of the web persisted. And in quiet briefing rooms long after midnight, agents asked the identical question as the public. If this could occur in Texas with esteemed bureaucrats, diplomatic guards, and federal supervision, where else could it be occurring? The response was not yet known. But the duty to locate it had only just commenced. What this incident ultimately exposed was not just a criminal web but a caution. For years, Americans were informed that the biggest perils came from the exterior, from borders, from foreign foes, but this inquiry proved something far more uneasy. Sometimes the most perilous violations start inside the very agencies meant to shield the nation. A former CIA director, a foreign envoy, and diplomatic exemption, titles that were supposed to signify faith, law, and international structure turned into buffers for felony. This was not a malfunction of American ideals. It was a violation of them. And yet this narrative does not conclude in gloom. Because when the reality finally emerged, it was American agencies that acted. It was the FBI researchers who tracked trends others disregarded. It was federal officers who held their position under fire. It was U.S. Marines who locked down the perimeter when diplomacy crumbled into criminality. It was magistrates who signed orders without fear of ranks or past influence. This mission sent a signal, one that matters profoundly in a fractured world. No rank is above the statute. No banner can permanently guard felony. No past job grants lifelong exemption. That is the teaching. A liberated society endures not because vice never shows up, but because it is challenged when found. This incident also reminds us why responsibility matters in governance. Why openness matters. Why agencies must be queried, audited, and fixed, not blindly believed. Power without supervision decays. Authority without repercussions spreads hurt. And when citizens cease asking questions, corruption grows at ease. Evan Marshall asked a query. He trusted the structure. Though the toll was crushing, his deeds eventually revealed a mechanism that had been toxic to communities for nearly 10 years. The struggle now advances, not just in tribunals, but in rule oversight and public knowledge. Because national safety is not only about lines and arms, it is about honor. And that duty belongs to all of us. If you believe no officer should ever be above the statute, comment justice below. If you believe America's agencies must be shielded from vice no matter how high it extends, comment defend the system. And if you stand with the men and women of the FBI, federal police, and the U.S. Armed Forces who hazard their lives to support the Constitution. Like this clip and share it. Because quietness shields corruption, vigilance shields the Republic.